When Vanessa laughed and touched my elbow like I was some harmless stranger, I knew my marriage was over. "Oh, don't mind him," she said to the circle of executives standing beneath the chandelier in the atrium of Halbrecht Design Group. "He's just the handyman. He helped me with a few things around the house." For 1 second, nobody moved. Not her regional director. Not the woman from HR. Not the 2 board members flown in from Chicago. Not me. I stood there in a borrowed maintenance jacket with a name patch that said Ray, my hand still wrapped around a glass of club soda, while my wife of 11 years, smiled like she'd told a clever little joke. Then Gregory Halbrecht, the founder's son, turned pale. Because he knew exactly who I was. If you're enjoying stories about real-life challenges, personal growth, and unforgettable life lessons, consider subscribing to the channel. New stories are released regularly, and you won't want to miss the next one. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 39 years old that night, and until 3 months earlier, I'd been the kind of man nobody noticed unless something broke. I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a brick ranch house I inherited from my father. I owned a small property maintenance company called Mercer Home Services. I fixed decks, rewired old kitchens, repaired storm damage, and spent most days with drywall dust on my boots and calluses across both palms. The work was honest, steady, and unglamorous. I liked it that way. I was also the father of an 8-year-old girl named Ellie, who still left notes in my lunch cooler that said things like, "Good luck fixing people's houses, Dad. You're the best builder in the world." That note was still in my truck the night my wife erased me with one sentence. Vanessa Mercer was 36, sharp as broken glass, beautiful in the kind of polished way that made people step aside for her. She was vice president of client strategy at Halbrecht Design Group, a high-end commercial interiors firm that had spent years trying to break into national expansion. She wore silk blouses that cost more than my power tools and carried ambition like a perfume. When we met, I loved that about her. She made me feel like life could widen. Back when we were younger, before promotions and image and curated friend groups, Vanessa used to sit on overturned paint buckets in houses I was renovating and eat takeout with me straight from the carton. She said she admired that I built things with my hands. She said I was solid. Safe. Real. Somewhere along the way, solid became embarrassing. I didn't understand how bad it had gotten until that party. The maintenance jacket was my own idea. 2 weeks earlier, I'd learned something I couldn't ignore. Halbrecht Design Group was quietly collapsing under a mountain of hidden debt, inflated invoices, and a series of sketchy vendor contracts approved by a small inner circle inside management. Gregory Halbrecht had come to me first, not because we were friends, but because he was desperate and because of my father. My father, Thomas Mercer, had once been Halbrecht's partner, not publicly, but financially. 40 years earlier, when Halbrecht was a tiny local firm, my father had provided the emergency capital that kept it alive. In return, he'd received an option agreement buried in old legal papers that almost nobody remembered. After my father died, those records passed to me in a steel lockbox I didn't open for nearly a year. When I finally did, after my mother's death and a stack of unpaid probate bills, I found letters, contracts, and a handwritten note from my father: "If Halbrecht ever stumbles, don't sell yourself short just because other people do." Gregory had tracked me down after a forensic audit uncovered the company's real situation. A private equity group wanted the firm stripped and sold in pieces. Gregory needed a silent buyer who could exercise the Mercer option, consolidate the voting shares, and keep 180 employees from losing their jobs. I laughed in his face the first time he asked. "I fix gutters," I told him. "You understand loyalty," he said. "Around here, that's rarer." I spent 10 nights reading legal files at my kitchen table while Ellie slept upstairs and Vanessa came home later and later, claiming quarter-end strategy meetings and client dinners. When I asked how things were going at work, she would shrug and say, "Complicated. You wouldn't really get the politics." I got more than she realized. The deeper I dug, the uglier it looked. Expense manipulation. Kickback patterns. projects awarded to shell vendors. And Vanessa's name kept appearing near key accounts, not as the architect of the fraud, but close enough to the people driving it that I couldn't tell whether she was blind, complicit, or simply willing not to ask questions if it meant another promotion. I didn't sign the deal to punish her. I signed it because my father had once saved that company, because 180 people had mortgages and kids and health insurance, and because I was tired of watching decent workers get crushed while polished liars climbed. The acquisition was set to close the afternoon of the party. Gregory suggested postponing my formal introduction until the board could stabilize things Monday morning. Vanessa invited me to the event out of obligation, not pride. "Just come for an hour," she said while fastening diamond earrings in our bathroom mirror. "And please wear something understated." I looked at her reflection. Understated? You know what I mean. What do I mean? She sighed like I was making life difficult on purpose. Dan, this matters. The CEO, board members, development leads, they're all going to be there. It's not really a work boot crowd. I should have said something then. Instead I said, maybe I won't go. She paused just long enough to make it insulting. Honestly, that might be easier. That sentence hollowed me out. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. So I made one phone call, borrowed a maintenance jacket from one of Gregory's facility guys, parked in the service lot, and came in through the loading corridor. I wanted to see my wife the way her world saw her when I was stripped away. Now I had. At the party, Gregory cleared his throat. "Vanessa," he said carefully, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." She still wore that social smile. "Oh?" The board chair, Lorraine Pike, looked from her to me. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, "this is Daniel Mercer." Vanessa laughed once, lightly. "Yes. My husband. Daniel." "I know." "No," Gregory said. "Daniel Mercer. Majority owner effective at 5 o'clock. I have replayed that moment 100 times, and what I remember most is not Vanessa's face, though the blood drained from it so fast it was almost theatrical. It was the silence after. The brutal, complete silence of a room realizing it had witnessed someone step on a landmine in heels. One of the executives whispered, "Oh my God." Vanessa stared at me as if the floor had opened under her. "What is he talking about?" I took off the maintenance badge and set it on the nearest cocktail table. "Exactly what he said." She blinked. "Daniel, stop. What kind of stunt is this?" "A legal one." Lorraine stepped in. We were about to make the announcement. Vanessa looked from me to Gregory to Lorraine, then back again. I could see her mind racing, trying to find the version of reality that made sense. "You bought this company?" "I helped save it." "That's not possible." "You should be careful with that phrase," I said quietly. "You've been using it about me for years." Her mouth tightened. "Can we talk in private?" "No," said Gregory, startling both of us. "Actually, not yet." Then he asked everyone to gather near the stage for a brief ownership announcement. What happened next should have felt satisfying. It didn't. Not right away. People who had ignored me all evening suddenly wanted to shake my hand. Senior managers I'd never met introduced themselves with careful smiles. Vanessa stood 3 feet away, frozen, as Gregory announced a restructuring review and praised Mr. Mercer's commitment to preserving the company's future. She looked like she might either slap me or collapse. I should have walked out after that. But then I saw her phone light up in her hand, and the message preview made my stomach drop. "Miss you already." "He suspect anything?" "No name." Just that line. Vanessa turned the screen over too late. That was the moment the humiliation stopped being about status and started being about betrayal. When we got home, Ellie was asleep at my sister's house, and the silence between us felt radioactive. Vanessa kicked off her heels in the foyer. "You humiliated me." I laughed because I honestly didn't know what else to do. "That's your opening line?" You ambushed me in front of my entire company. Your company? You know what I mean. No, apparently I don't. She turned on the kitchen light, and for the first time in years I saw panic cracking through her composure. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you? Tell you what? Who texted you tonight? Her face changed. Not much. Just enough. I leaned against the counter because suddenly I needed the support. So there is someone. She crossed her arms. It's not what you think. People only say that when it is exactly what you think. She looked away. His name is Eric. It hurt in the most ordinary way possible. No thunder. No cinematic ringing in my ears. Just a dull, crushing pressure in my chest. From work? Yes. How long? She was quiet. How long, Vanessa? 6 months. I nodded once. While I was taking Ellie to school, fixing your mother's porch, making dinner on the nights you had client presentations? Don't do that. Do what? Add a timeline? Tears sprang to her eyes, and part of me hated that I still reacted to them. It wasn't supposed to happen. Nothing ever is. She sank into a chair. You don't understand what it's been like. That nearly made me angry enough to shout. Nearly. Then help me understand. Help me understand introducing your husband as hired help. Help me understand cheating on me while I'm putting money into keeping your company alive. Help me understand who exactly you've become. She whispered, someone who got tired of feeling alone. I stared at her. You were lonely? You were always working. I was keeping us afloat. You were keeping us comfortable, she shot back, finding anger now that self-pity had failed. But emotionally? You checked out years ago. Everything became bills, repairs, school pickups, obligations. I was drowning, Daniel. At work, at home, everywhere. Eric listened. Eric wanted something. Maybe, she said. But at least he saw me. That line stayed with me because it contained a truth ugly enough to matter. Marriages do not usually explode from one lie. They rot from 1,000 unattended hungers. But another truth mattered too. Did Eric ask you for information? I asked. She frowned. What? About the acquisition. About the audit. About Gregory. About vendor reviews. Her eyes widened, not in guilt this time, but in fear. Why would you ask that? Because I'd seen Eric's name in the audit files. Eric Dalton, Chief Operations Officer, central figure in several suspicious approvals. I didn't answer. I just looked at her until she stood up too quickly. No. I didn't know anything, Daniel. I swear. Did he use you? I don't know. That was worse than a confession. The next morning, I filed for temporary separation and requested an emergency review of Vanessa's access privileges at Halbrecht. I also asked my attorney to begin preparing custody papers, not because I wanted to take Ellie away from her mother, but because I had no idea how deep the damage went. Vanessa cried when I told her I wanted Ellie with me until things stabilized. You think I'd hurt our daughter? No, I said. I think you don't know who's standing next to you. By Monday, rumors were flying through the company. Some people said I was a secret investor. Some said Gregory had been forced out. Some said Vanessa married me for money, which would have been funny if it weren't so far from how we started. I met department heads one by one, and the pattern emerged fast. Fear. Confusion. And underneath both, resentment toward Eric Dalton, who had spent the last year consolidating power while blaming every financial crack on market conditions. Vanessa requested a private meeting at the office. I nearly refused. Then Gregory told me something that made my skin go cold. Eric had wiped a set of contract files from the internal system the night of the party. Vanessa came into the conference room looking 10 years older. No makeup. No armor. I didn't know about the fraud, she said before sitting down. I believe you didn't know all of it. She flinched at the distinction. He told me the company needed a few aggressive workarounds. He said Gregory was weak. He said the board would replace half the senior team if numbers didn't improve. Did he ask you to sign things? A few performance approvals. Client acceleration reports. Some vendor exceptions. I slid copies across the table. These vendors don't exist. Her hand trembled as she read. Oh my God. You signed off on 3 of them. I thought legal cleared them. Legal was bypassed. She covered her mouth. Daniel, I swear, I never got any money. I'm not worried you got paid. I'm worried you got used. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw shame land in full. I have been awful to you. I said nothing. She swallowed. Not just the affair. Everything. The jokes. The way I minimized you in front of people. The way I acted like your work made me smaller when it was the only honest thing in our house. Anger is simpler than grief. Her apology made things worse. Before I could answer, Gregory burst in without knocking. We have a problem, he said. Eric's gone. Gone meant phone off, office empty, laptop missing. What none of us expected was the first twist waiting in his wake. By late afternoon, our forensic team recovered deleted voice memos from a backup server. Most were useless fragments. One was not. It was Eric's voice. Calm. Smug. If Mercer's wife keeps feeding us internal mood, we'll know when to move. She doesn't even realize she's doing it. Tell Sandra to set up the transfer vendors before the board vote. Vanessa sank into the chair like her bones had vanished. There it was. Not a grand criminal mastermind. Just a selfish man using a lonely woman's access and ego to help steal from a company. She started crying, not pretty crying, not strategic crying, but the kind that comes from discovering you weren't chosen, only exploited. I should tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt sick. The police got involved. So did federal investigators once wire fraud entered the picture. Eric had already moved money offshore through a chain of fake subcontractors. Sandra, the controller he'd referenced, lawyered up within hours. The press picked up whispers of executive misconduct. Halbrecht's biggest client threatened to freeze a renewal. Employees panicked. Ellie asked me at dinner why Mommy wasn't sleeping at home. How do you answer that without breaking a child in two? I told her, Mommy and I are having grown-up problems. Ellie pushed peas around her plate. Did she do something bad? Kids always know where the truth lives. She made mistakes, I said. Ellie looked at me for a long time. Are you gonna leave too? That question almost undid me. I moved to her side of the table and knelt down. Never. You hear me? Whatever happens between adults, I am your dad every day. She wrapped her arms around my neck so hard it hurt. I needed that hurt. Over the next 3 weeks, Vanessa began cooperating fully with investigators. She surrendered her devices, sat for interviews, and gave a statement that implicated Eric and Sandra in falsified approvals. Her attorney advised minimal cooperation. She ignored him. One evening she came to my porch while Ellie was at dance class. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the performance she'd worn for years. I don't want the house, she said. What? In the divorce. If that's what this becomes. I don't want to fight you for the house, and I don't want Ellie used as leverage. Why are you saying this now? Because I know what I deserve. That's not how custody works. No, she said softly. But maybe consequences should. She sat on the porch swing my father had built and stared at the yard. Do you know the worst part? I waited. I used to tell myself I'd become hard because that's what success required. But the truth is, I liked feeling superior. I liked being the polished one. The one who knew the right rooms, the right wine, the right people. Every time someone looked down on you and I stayed quiet, some broken part of me felt elevated. Honesty can be brutal when it finally shows up sober. So why now? I asked. She gave a miserable laugh. Because when Eric ran, he took my fantasy with him. And when you stood there at that party, I saw what I'd traded away. Not for love. Not even for ambition. Just vanity. I wanted to forgive her then. I also wanted never to trust her again. Those two things can live in the same chest and poison each other. A week later came the second twist. My attorney called at 6:12 a.m. Daniel, I need you downtown. Why? Vanessa filed something overnight. My stomach dropped. Custody? Just come. At the courthouse, Vanessa was already there, holding a manila envelope. She looked terrified. Her lawyer stood beside her, irritated. I'm not contesting primary custody, she said the moment I approached. Then what is this? She handed the envelope to my attorney. Inside was a notarized affidavit and a sealed packet of documents. What's this? I asked again. Vanessa took a breath. Before he disappeared, Eric had Sandra transfer money through a consulting account in my name. I didn't know it existed until yesterday when investigators traced it. My attorney frowned. How much? 480,000. I just stared. I never touched it, she said quickly. But on paper it looks like I did. If they believe I knowingly participated, I could be indicted. If that happens and we're in the middle of a custody fight, Ellie gets dragged through all of it. So you're surrendering leverage. I'm protecting our daughter. Then she said the thing I never expected, and I brought proof Eric forged one of the signature authorizations using a scan from a holiday card I signed. My attorney thinks this shifts intent. It wasn't just self-preservation. She had walked in carrying the one piece of evidence that might save herself while also making sure Ellie wouldn't be weaponized by either side. People can be guilty and still choose one brave thing. The real climax came 2 months later at a public board hearing held in Halbrecht's auditorium after the company's lenders demanded full disclosure before extending restructuring terms. Staff packed the room. Reporters lined the back wall. Investigators had finally located Eric in a condo outside Miami and brought him back under warrant. I stood at the side of the stage with Gregory and Lorraine. Vanessa sat in the front row, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Eric looked immaculate. Men like him often do right before impact. The hearing began with dry financial summaries, but tension moved through the room like live current. Then the investigator played the recovered voice memo. You could feel the audience shift. Eric's attorney claimed the recording lacked context. Then Sandra, in exchange for a reduced charge, testified that Eric had directed the shell vendors and used social access points inside leadership, his phrase, not hers. She identified Vanessa as one of those access points but confirmed Vanessa had never received operational payments and had not known the vendors were fake. Eric smirked through most of it. Until Vanessa stood up. She hadn't been scheduled to speak. Lorraine started to object, but Vanessa walked to the microphone anyway. Her voice shook at first. Then it steadied. My name is Vanessa Mercer. I'm here because I signed documents I didn't fully understand, trusted a man who was lying to me, and ignored the kind of instincts I used to admire in other people, especially in my husband. The room went silent. She didn't look at me. She looked at the employees. I betrayed my marriage long before I betrayed my job. I let ambition make me vain, and vanity made me easy to manipulate. That doesn't excuse what Mr. Dalton did. It explains why I didn't stop him sooner. Eric's jaw tightened. Then Vanessa turned toward him. You told me I was smarter than everyone in this building. But what you really needed was someone arrogant enough not to ask questions. That was me. Not anymore. There are moments when truth stops sounding emotional and starts sounding final. That was one of them. My attorney then introduced the forged authorization evidence, followed by metadata analysis proving the signature insertion came from Eric's device. The room erupted, not loudly, but with that stunned human noise people make when the shape of blame changes in real time. Eric finally snapped. "You're all acting shocked," he said, rising halfway from his chair. "This place was drowning. I did what any of you would have done if you had the nerve." "No," I said, before I realized I was speaking. Everyone turned. I walked to the other microphone. My hands were steady, which surprised me. "That's the lie men like you tell yourselves. That greed is courage. That contempt is intelligence. That using people is leadership." Eric stared at me with open hatred. "You looked at this company and saw assets to strip," I said. "You looked at my wife and saw weakness to exploit. You looked at workers and saw numbers to sacrifice. And you looked at me and assumed a man who builds with his hands wouldn't understand what you were doing." The room was so quiet I could hear the buzz of the lights. My father taught me something you never learned. When something matters, you don't gut it for parts. You repair it. Even when it's ugly. Even when it's expensive. Even when it breaks your heart. I wasn't talking only about the company. Maybe Vanessa knew that. Maybe everyone did. By the end of that hearing, Eric Dalton was finished. Criminal charges moved forward. Lenders approved a conditional extension. Halbrecht survived, smaller but cleaner. Sandra took her deal. Gregory kept his title under oversight. I took a formal seat as executive chairman for 1 year, long enough to stabilize operations before finding somebody qualified who actually wanted the job. Vanessa resigned the next week. Our divorce was finalized 6 months later. That part matters because not every story of remorse becomes reconciliation. Sometimes redemption doesn't mean getting everything back. Sometimes it means finally telling the truth and accepting the bill. We built a careful co-parenting life for Ellie. Painful at first. Then manageable. Vanessa moved into a townhouse 15 minutes away and took a lower-profile consulting job with a nonprofit housing initiative. Real work. Less glamour. More purpose. She showed up to dance recitals on time. She stopped dressing like every room was a contest. She laughed more softly. It took me a long time to believe the change was real. As for me, I kept Mercer Home Services. I hired 3 more crews and still spent Fridays in old jeans walking job sites because I never wanted to become the kind of man who forgot what honest labor felt like. At Halbrecht, I made one policy non-negotiable: every quarter, leadership spent 1 day shadowing frontline staff, install teams, support coordinators, maintenance crews, reception, shipping. No exceptions. No one got to build status by pretending other people were invisible. About a year after the party, Ellie had a school event called Career Day Family Lunch. Parents sat cross-legged in a noisy multipurpose room while kids introduced them. I braced myself when Ellie took the microphone. "This is my dad," she said proudly. "He fixes houses, and he helps run a big company, but mostly he fixes things. Even when they're really broken." Across the room, Vanessa lowered her eyes and smiled through tears. It wasn't dramatic. No orchestral swell. No grand public apology. Just a child saying the truest thing in the room. Later, in the parking lot, Vanessa stopped me beside my truck. "I used to think being admired was the same as being valuable," she said. I waited. "I'm trying to teach Ellie something better." I nodded once. "Good." She looked at me like she wanted forgiveness, but for the first time she didn't ask for it. Maybe that was growth too. I don't hate her anymore. Hate is a long mortgage on someone else's damage. But I learned something hard: love without respect turns fragile, and success without character turns predatory. If you ignore either truth long enough, your whole life can start to look polished while the beams rot underneath. The night Vanessa introduced me as just the handyman, she thought she was protecting her image. What she really did was reveal the entire architecture of our marriage in a single sentence: what she valued, what she hid, what she believed made a person matter. She was wrong. A person is not their title. Not their salary. Not the room they can get into or the people they can impress. A person is what they do when loyalty costs them something. When honesty embarrasses them. When repair is harder than replacement. That night I walked into a party wearing a maintenance jacket. I walked out with a broken marriage, a frightened heart, and a company full of strangers suddenly depending on me. I also walked out with the truth. And as brutal as truth can be, it is still the only foundation strong enough to build a new life on. If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy meaningful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more.